All right, let's dive right into this explainer and explore a seriously fascinating what if in the history of technology. We usually just accept today's global tech landscape as this fixed reality, right? Like some countries were always destined to be silicon superpowers, and the rest of the world was just meant to buy their stuff. But history is rarely ever that straightforward. Today, we're unpacking a mostly forgotten chapter from the 1970s, a moment when the entire geography of global innovation could have looked completely different. To really understand this, we need to answer a pretty provocative question. Could Argentina have had its very own tech giant, much like Japan's legendary NEC? We're going to figure this out by comparing the rise of Japan's Nippon Electric Company with Argentina's Fate Electronica, looking at just how incredibly close this alternate reality came to actually existing. It's an unbelievable story of ambition, basically identical strategies, and ultimately how a nation's external environment can either make or break a giant.
Because early on, these two companies shared this incredibly similar technological DNA. They were both out there pushing the absolute boundaries of what was possible in computing for their respective regions. But as we'll see, their ultimate destinies couldn't have been more radically different. Section 1. Two tech giants emerging. It's always wild to see where these massive tech companies actually originate, isn't it? Take Fate, for example. It was founded in 1940 by the Madani's brothers to make waterproof fabrics and rubber tires. I mean, hardly the stuff of Silicon Valley. Meanwhile, over in Japan, NEC started way back in 1899 producing basic telegraphs and switchboards. So both of these companies had their roots buried deep in traditional physical manufacturing before taking massive leaps into the totally unknown world of high-tech. So here's where things get really interesting. Both companies aggressively pivoted towards solid-state physics and cutting-edge R&D. NEC started pouring resources into heavy transistor research in 1950, slowly but surely building up their capabilities. A couple of decades later, but with that exact same level of ambition, Fate launched its División Electrónica in 1971. And they shared this super bold philosophy: no relying on foreign licenses. They wanted to build their tech completely from the ground up to forge true, sovereign technological capabilities.
Section 2. Shared DNA and innovation.
And that strict in-house R&D approach, it paid off fast, producing incredible hardware like Fate's Cifra 311. This really proved that Argentina wasn't just sitting around assembling imported parts. Under the guidance of brilliant minds like Roberto Zubieta and Manuel Sadowski, they were designing their own complex circuits. They were manufacturing beautifully designed, incredibly high-tech hardware right there at home.
And the scale of their success was just staggering. By 1975, Fate reached 51% local component integration. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Over half the parts were made locally. They weren't some tiny niche player. They literally captured half of the entire domestic market. They completely washed away global heavyweights like IBM and Olivety within their own borders, and they were even snatching up a significant chunk of the market in Mexico. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is Manuel Madanez, the visionary behind Fate. He gave a strict mandate to his company: no foreign licenses, period. He wanted to create products that were so inherently complex, they couldn't just be easily copied by improvising competitors. It's a direct mirror of NEC's indigenous computing push over in Japan. For both of them, building true, sovereign technological capability was the ultimate goal. Section 3. Pushing the computing frontier. It's amazing to look at these parallel milestones. While NEC was making history in Japan by building fully transistorized computers, like the ENIAC 2201, made entirely with Japanese parts, FET was breaking completely new ground globally. FET's MicroCipher series was literally the second pocket calculator ever made in the entire world, and the very first one to have scientific capabilities. They were actively exporting these highly advanced devices to Europe, right under the nose of massive global competitors. And their ambition literally just kept growing. Fate went on to develop the Cipher 1000. Now, this wasn't just a fancy calculator. This was a proto-PC. It was a desktop computer meant to rival the processing power of a massive IBM 370 mainframe. That displays a level of ambition identical to NEC's massive ACOS mainframe computing projects. Both companies were independently realizing that the future of tech meant transforming computers from giant room-sized industrial machines into accessible everyday devices. Section 4. The point of divergence. Right, so despite having these nearly identical trajectories, this is where the story takes a really sharp turn.
Their paths split entirely, and it's all due to their external environments. In 1975, Fate's Cifra 1000 prototype was ready to go. But then in 1976, Argentina suffered a severe institutional rupture with a military coup. Meanwhile, a world away in 1977, NEC was safely rolling out its visionary computers and communication strategy, which smoothly paved the way to their absolute dominance with the PC 8800 in the 1980s. Fate simply never got that chance.
To really understand why, we just have to look at the vastly different environments they were operating in. Japan provided NEC with immense structural advantages: massive state backing from the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, stable capital, soft credits, and a dedicated 30-year national vision. Argentina, on the other hand, was thrown into total chaos. Volatile hyperinflation struck, and new economic policies under Martínez de Hoz abruptly opened up the borders to unrestricted cheap imports. That instantly wiped out the protective conditions Fate desperately needed to scale up.
Section 5. External Forces and Survival. Because, neutrally speaking, political instability has a very real physical cost on a nation's tech sector. It literally drains technological capability. Those abrupt open-door policies meant Fate's locally produced tech suddenly couldn't compete on price with a flood of imported Japanese goods. Even worse, brilliant engineers like Carlos Varsovsky and Roberto Zubieta were forced into exile due to threats, which completely drained the company's brain trust. And that instability even reached the very top, marked by the tragic 1977 kidnapping of Manuel Madinet's wife, Mathilde Matraget. It completely destroyed any industrial continuity Fate had left. So, flooded by cheap imports and completely drained of its top engineering talent, Fate simply couldn't sustain the massive R&D costs required to compete on a global scale. They officially closed the doors of their electronics division in 1982. And in a twist of profound, almost unbelievable historical irony, the physical remnants and assets of Fate Electronica were eventually purchased by a foreign competitor, Japan's NEC.
Section 6. The alternate silicon reality.
The sources point out this incredible counterfactual. Argentina essentially had the exact same window of opportunity that nations like South Korea or Taiwan had during the 1970s and 80s. Had Fate's electronics division managed to survive those external shocks and pivot into telecommunications and microcomputers, cities like Buenos Aires or Cordoba might very well have become massive hubs of chip design and intellectual property for all of Latin America.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this to ponder. We so often credit technological success solely to the sheer brilliance of a few engineers or maybe the magic of the free market. But when we look at the mirrored beginnings and the vastly different endings of NEC and Fate Electronica, we really have to ask, how much does a nation's political continuity and macroeconomic stability actually dictate its technological destiny? It's a pretty stark reminder of just how fragile technological sovereignty can be, and a truly fascinating glimpse into the Silicon Valley that almost was.